Hello, everyone. I am Bob Lingle of Off the Beaten Path Bookstore in Lakewood, New York. I am here tonight with Stacy D. Flood. Originally from Buffalo and currently living in Seattle, Stacy Flood's work has been published nationally and performed on stages nationwide, as well as in the Puget Sound area. He has been a DISQUIET scholar in Lisbon, an artist in residence at the Millay Colony of Arts, and the recipient of the Getty Fellowship to the Squaw Valley Community of Writers. I want to thank Stacy for being here, Lanternfish Press for helping put everything together, and for everyone tonight joining us. If you have any questions throughout the event, feel free to use, if you're on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, you can use the comment feature to ask questions, and we will get to them as we can. Stacy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So let's talk about Buffalo. We are an hour and a half from Buffalo. I'm originally from Buffalo, and
awesome.
So are you? Where? What was your? Were you born in Buffalo, and how long were you there for?
Born in Buffalo, lived there till I was about 9 or so. We lived off of, if you're familiar with the Buffalo area, off of Jefferson on the east side. He was right behind Canisius College. That's where I grew up. So yeah, I mean, Buffalo has just been, of course, a part of me even after leaving. Family moved down to Phoenix, then up to Seattle. But I did my undergrad work also in Buffalo. So I had a chance to go back and reconnect a little bit. So that's been great. I always cherish that.
Very nice. How did you want to go back to Buffalo because of your youth or the programs there?
The program's there, but also I did want to reconnect just a little bit. I'd been out of the area for some time. I had different memories of it. Some of them came back, of course, once I got back to the Buffalo area. Some of the things where the Dairy Queen is, Ted's Hot Dogs, all those staples of the area came back quickly. But just again, reconnecting with family, reconnecting with the area, and just the school. I really did want to attend there and learn everything about film. That's why I went to film school up there before doing my graduate work in San Francisco. So yeah, it was good to actually get back and get reacclimated to the cold, but also to the environment.
When did you graduate from UB?
92.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's been a while.
You look younger.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate it so much.
So this is The Salt Fields is your first novella, your first work of prose that's published, but you have a lot of plays under your belt. Explain to me the difference in your approach from writing a novella to writing plays.
I'll talk a little bit about the similarities and I'll go to the differences.
Sure, yeah.
One thing that I found out is this, particularly being a novella. I really wanted to keep this into a compact space of reading and also the compact space of the train as it goes through. So I really did want to utilize that as well as when I think about it in plays and the playwriting. Oftentimes one scene has to build onto the next. You have to use your dialogue oftentimes to actually drive your characters' motivations or understanding of those characters. At the same time, that idea of being in that confined theater, the idea of everyone having that one shared experience, whatever's happening on the stage, everyone is experiencing it. And as uncomfortable as it may be, it is something that everyone is taking with them. So I really wanted to bring that out in the novella as well. Whereas there are this set of characters, there isn't a big cast. It is a train until there's a couple of stops that they go through, but in general, just keeping everything as compact there. But the difference, of course, was a lot of the interior that just lends itself more towards the novella than it will for a play. Oftentimes, of course, your set designers and your set personnel will be able to handle that and get that feel. I wanted to make sure that when people read the novella, that they also got that same type of feel, if not visually, but at least the impression of what that time and that area was like.
Did you enjoy the process and maybe you viewed it as more freedom or a burden of being able to have that internal struggle where you can't really have a play that is all internal dialogue?
Exactly. I make it a really long, boring play. Yeah, I love the difference. I love how in a play, like oftentimes that's what you have, right? And that's it. There's some things, right, with set design again, and with movement that's actually going to give you, or even the blocking of it, that's going to give you something, some indication of what people are thinking and what they're doing, as well. But really, it's all going to come through mostly the dialogue, what people say, what they don't say. The silences sometimes can speak as loudly as the dialogue and as the words. The misdirection, what people really want through their dialogue, and all of that. Whereas here, getting into that internal monologue, oftentimes I had to make sure that it did still drive the narrative forward. It did still make sure that it was something that was relevant to what this character was going through and this character's experience all the way through. Again, making sure there was something that this character's internal feelings on something, or this internal recollection, is one that still would drive what the narrative, the plot, the scene would still be.
Did you have any sort of particular influences in your writing going into this project?
This one, there's just so many great novellas out there, and I've always been such a fan of the form. Not just the compact nature of it, but again, the way in which it does keep the reader in for a period of time. So, I mean, everyone from Toni Morrison, right? Nella Larson, Fitzgerald, even some Hemingway, all of that actually came through. Some William Maxwell as well. All of that, that idea of the compactness of the novella, and how that you can use space, time, what you choose to show in a certain room being really as important as a larger scene. And also, of course, Virginia Woolf too. Just all of this.
There was one. Now I'm trying to find. I had my notes numbered for the quotes that I wanted to talk about.
Oh, thanks.
And then once we started talking, I totally forgot what numbers related to what. But there was one in terms of there was a line in the book that I'll find that reminded me of like The Alchemist and Siddhartha. Really, the whole book of that voyage. Oh, here we are. It's the very first one, and it's that's how the world worked. You sent out what you expected from it with enough heart and longing, and your reward came back to you. Right when I read that, I'm like, alchemist.
Nice.
When you really want something, the entire world will conspire to help you achieve that goal.
And I really wanted the idea also of that type of hope to come through as well.
Yes.
The characters are hoping for that. Like, they have that type of ambition. They have that type of hope. Again, Buffalo was a very major stop given Bethlehem Steel of people coming up from the Great Migration through the South. So they came up oftentimes with that hope in mind, with that idea that you're going to send out those good things, and those good things will come back to us.
And there's so many themes, and your book is just so quotable. There is one that I wanted to get into about kind of enduring trauma and the innocence of children. I thought that you did a very good job of describing like just how a child can bounce back from different situations. And that is, we believed in horror and horrible men. Bad things happened, and in the morning we went on with our games, making handprints in wet earth, hoping they would last through the entire afternoon, or marveling at how long our fingers have grown. What was your thought process when you were going through that description?
I think what I wanted to do, particularly with passages like that, was the idea of horror or the terror being normalized. The idea that it's just something that as the horrors happened, but these people persevered. And it was just, unfortunately, normalized. It wasn't something that was seen to be that type of trauma. That was the worst type of traumas. Oftentimes can be ones that are internalized. Right? And the point that you just seen, it just seemed to be the normal existence. There are a couple of passages in there where people, again, whatever happens to them, because it remains a mystery for some. And I want to make sure that came through as well. The idea of that things can happen, horrific things can happen. The terror can either manifest itself or stay unknown, but still that has an impact. And for a lot of times it's just when the horror, the terror itself is one that's just seen to be part of the day-to-day existence, and people go through it. Oftentimes that can be more horrible than the shock.
There's so many examples that you can relate to that. There's the one that popped into my mind when I read that was like I was in middle school when the Columbine school shooting happened. And you look at that event and you're like, oh, well, obviously this can't happen again. But then it does.
Right.
And you just kind of like the students that experience it are affected by it the most, obviously, but then it's news for a day, and then you just kind of go on. So whether or not our ability to cope with trauma, but then our inaction because of the fact that we're just coping with it.
You're just coping with it. It becomes a part of just a part of it. I mean, there's just something that many communities are dealing with, unfortunately, still today. But at the same time, as you mentioned, it could be something as having the metal detectors in school, and the students don't think anything of it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is just this is what we do, right? Or what the again the horrors that led to that. Led to those.
And just kind of on the topic of children and quiet, there was a line of the different kinds of quiet of everyone thinks that all quiet is the same kind of emptiness. As a parent, I would say everyone but parents think that all quiet is the same kind.
Exactly. There's that signal to noise ratio that I think I know parents have. When things get a little bit too quiet, like, now I'm worried. So I can definitely understand that. I've again, of course, not having kids myself, but have been with parents when I've had conversations, of course, and they hear the kids, and it's almost like the conversations will stop in the room because they're like, the kids are quiet.
Yeah,
something's going on. So yeah, I can understand that completely.
But there's times I can understand that emptiness feeling of, especially from the perspective of a parent, of when you go home, you know that the kids aren't there and you're just like, oh, it's quiet. Like, I'm not used to this.
Yeah. And how it impacts different ways, right? Again, like there can be a quiet after a big event, an explosion or something like that. And that quiet again is going to hit someone different than just a quiet that's going to be in a comfortable room.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just, we've picked up more viewers since we started. And I just want to let people know, if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, you can use the comment section to add in any questions, thoughts that you might have. And their survival was probably one of the biggest parts of this book. And there's a couple quotes that I wanted to get into from that. And it's, all I did was survive. Seems like that's all we ever do, is what one character said. And Minister, who's the main character, says, sometimes that's enough. And that almost feels like the kind of the story in a nutshell for Minister. Talk about what your inspiration was behind survival and what that went into the story for that.
Yes, and the idea of survival and how relative it can be, and the idea of if it's just surviving, does that count as a win? So often people have to consider that, and oftentimes it is, right? Just making it through to the next day, or particularly in the environments that we're living in now, that can be success, right? So survival sometimes can be one in which it's just the base, but at the same time, it can be something where it's a triumph. And I think that these characters are ones in which to say, coming from, again, a lot of the horrors that they experienced and internalized, that just the idea that I can survive, I can get to a location where I can survive. Survival is something that is available to me, or will be available to me. That can just be a huge accomplishment, and a way in which it just alters the way you're thinking, alters your life expectations, alters how you see your future, alters how you see the world around you.
And one quote towards the end is, I survived like my grandmother. I tell stories to preserve the rest. Going into your own personal website and reading through your story, Storytelling is obviously, you studied film, as I did as well. You're right. I sell stories. Storytelling is very, like, so much important to me. Talk about, like, your experience with storytelling, and especially how it relates to your family.
Oh, I've always loved it. And I love the stories. And particularly with this book and things like that, I wanted to focus on the missing portions of the stories. And those can be just as beautiful as what's there. Those can be just as important. The sections that may be missing, the sections that others may not want to talk about, but the idea of the narrative and how one has related their experiences, and what they choose to keep from those experiences, I think is just so important. And just in the storytelling, the narratives, the narratives that I grew up listening to, the stories of people that I grew up, again, never meeting, but having just heard the stories about, and in a couple instances actually meeting them, like, wow, that's not like them at all. Like it's not what I expected them to be in the least. But the story that they carried, that other people carried with them, became them for me. And so in the reality of their actual appearance, changed that up quite a bit. But still, I think that just the idea of a story encapsulates so much truth, so much emotion, so much of the way in which one can interpret the world, right? To a degree, it can be something that really does what really carries people forward. Oftentimes, it's the stories within certain religions that actually carry that religion forward. It's the stories within a lot of communities that carry that history forward. So not so much the fact that this happened on this date and this happened on this date, but the story of this person, how this person persevered, how this person triumphed, can be such an inspiration. Or even if it's stories about a person's failure, right? Why that person may have failed. I mean, Greek myths, of course, are popular with that.
Yeah.
Why that failed. Why was that's something that you want to avoid. But it wasn't just you want to avoid this because these are things that can happen. Here's a story behind someone. Here's a story behind it. So I think that the way that we as people internalize stories, relate stories to our lives, relate stories to the lives around us. One of the activities that I know people do is that you build a story from strangers sitting at a restaurant, right? It's just building out the stories of people who just permeate our lives.
How did you come to the setting for the salt fields?
Family history. My grandparents came up through the Great Migration through South Carolina. So, but again, it wasn't designed in any way to be any of these characters, nor was it to be a travelogue of their exact experiences. What I was looking for was how would that experience be for different people. Everyone who came up during that time had a different reason for doing so. I think that oftentimes it can be the misinterpretation that it was a homogeneous group simply looking for work. Some were looking for promise. Some were looking for a type of escape. Some were looking for just a different community that was up there. So everyone had their own different reasons for coming up. But I just wanted to take a group of people who may not have been together in any other instance except for this car, this day, and then talk about how they relate to each other. That experience, what that experience would have been like to actually make that journey during that time.
I enjoyed the real, and some I found it a little bit frustrating. Some may find it just because we so demand closure in all things. But especially for that time period, like you're not exchanging email addresses or social media,
right?
Whatever. But the fact that some of the characters just drop off, and you're like, I don't know what happened.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
You wouldn't. There wouldn't be an investigation. Oftentimes, especially for the African American community down there, there wouldn't be something that's looked into. There wouldn't be a story that would come about what happened to them unless someone would have asked, or someone else would have made that journey up. So it a lot of times would have been that mystery, and that mystery can also be so telling. And again, it's the idea, as you mentioned beforehand, of moving on through trauma, normalizing that mystery can also be a part of that as well. It's just a matter of just saying that we're going to move forward with that hope, and have that hope be such a strong measure, but that mystery and that openness is just something that many had to deal with.
And I wanted to get into a question. Apparently, your first grade best friend Scott has a
Hey, that's awesome! Fantastic.
Stacy wants to know, what is easier, writing a novel or a play?
Neither. But I think that again, it's the difference. I love the difference between them. It may take me a shorter period of time to write a play, particularly if I have the characters. If I have the characters and I know what it is that I want to do, and I'm going through with the characters, sometimes the dialogue can just flow. But along those same lines, oftentimes it takes going back and saying, okay, what's the point of this scene? What's the point of this line? What is it the character wants to get out of the scene? What is it that the character wants to achieve or wants to convince someone of? What is it that they're not saying? What is it that they're lying about? So as different iterations and as you rework a play, oftentimes you want to keep those things in mind. Entire sections you may cut out, entire scenes, entire characters, simply to see what's going to serve the narrative and the narrative flow. Very similar for a novella, at least, that I've written, is that it's keeping that flow and keeping it engaged. This one took a lot more time, simply because I wanted to make sure that I kept the pacing and at the same time kept the language and stayed into, again, the characters, the dialogue, what they would have known, what they would have suspected, and things of that nature. So this one took about, say, 12, 13 years, if not longer.
Oh, wow.
So it did take a while. But as far as ease, each one has its challenges. Each one is something that you want to consider as being its own thing and what actually serves that text or that medium best.
What was the driving force over the 12 or 13 years that you were working for it? Did you know where the story is going? Did you have a beginning, middle, and end? What was the process there?
I had the end. I had a little bit of the opening.
Okay.
And I kind of knew, and I had certain scenes in mind. And I usually write longhand, which is also why it took so long. I write longhand, and I have a three subject ruled notebook.
Okay.
And I have to finish one section before I decide to write. Before I know, okay, this now I can start working on it, and it's going to be a piece. It's going to be something that I'm going to work on further. So suffice to say, I have a lot of those notebooks sitting around, in which they only have a few pages in them, maybe 1 or 2 pages, and I stopped, and it just wasn't enough there. But this one just came back. I just came back to it, and I did get a cadence together of just writing every day. Right? Taking some time, scheduling it out, blocking the time, no matter what else was happening. If it's just me sitting at the computer staring at it, if it's just me sitting at a blank page staring at it, if it's just me taking one section and revising it, it's just a matter of just writing through and keeping that hunger for it. And it was just a story that stayed with me. And all the while, I was like, this is the one that I think is gonna be the one that I want to make sure it enters the world.
Nice. So a couple of questions that came in. One from Anne Marie: is your writing typically rooted and or inspired by true events?
Somewhat, and I would say that oftentimes it's a true event that's the impetus for it. But then from there, what I would usually do is think about what those people in that event must have been feeling. What is it that they were thinking? What is it what made them react the way that they did? And then to say, okay, from there, can I extrapolate really what a story would be around them? Again, even for this, the true story would be, yes, I had family that came up through the Great Migration, right? But then from there, I say, well, what other characters would have been coming up during that time? What would they have been like? What would the challenges have been? What would their triumphs have been? What was it that they were looking for? What was it that they may have been afraid of? And then taking all of that and just condensing it again into these pages and showcasing it as they make their journey.
And Jen has a question. Stacy, do you see a way this novella can be adapted to a screenplay, play, movie at some point? The video at the beginning made me want more. Thank you.
The video is awesome. So thank Bob for the video. That was fantastic. So at first, when I conceptualized like a novella, screenplay, even I've written a couple of those, as well as as plays, I see them as just being that one thing. Even if it's a short story, only as that. This though, and speaking to other people, they've given me ideas like, this could be a screenplay, or this could be something that it has a different life in another form. So I'm interested in it. I'm interested in doing more with it. Of course, there's something that would need to change, but yeah, I think it is something. Whereas some things, some stories, some ideas, some themes can cross medium that way, and then make it so that the narrative itself can cross as well.
Yeah, definitely with the minimalist in terms of most of it is on the train. That definitely helps with the play aspect.
Yeah, very true, very true.
And where am I? Sorry about that. The internal conflicts with the main character minister. There's so much conflict between trying to fit in with the group of characters, and you did a great job of illustrating it. Like, he has all of these stories, but none of them are really his own stories. And then he has stories that he can tell, but he does not want to.
Yes. And thank you, because hopefully that comes through as well, that he is interested in telling these stories and telling the audience these stories. But when is opportunities in his own, he may glance by them and just move forward from that. So it is a character who is more interested in, as Lana, one of the characters mentions, the idea of things, the idea of something that's out there that really really encapsulates or excites this person, rather than what they're doing themselves. So there are some events, again, that you think would be something that the character would linger on, where it's like, oh no, this is it happened, so I'm gonna just move forward. However, other things that he's inherited, the stories that he's inherited through his past, linger a little bit more for him, and I wanted to have that come through. So thank you for mentioning that.
There was a Chuck Palahniuk is one of my favorite writers, and there's a quote of his that I kind of internalize as I go through life. And the best way to waste your life is by taking notes. The easiest way to avoid living is to just watch, look for the details, report, don't participate. Let Big Brother do the singing and dancing for you. Be a reporter, be a good witness, a grateful member of the audience. And that's kind of the struggle. That quote just kept coming up in my head as I was reading through, and especially every time Minister was trying to fit in.
Yes.
And not.
yeah. Trying to fit in, trying to not be a part of the audience, and trying to actually ingratiate himself to this group, but at the same time failing in many ways, or by being a mystery, being the sounding board, and actually being a part of the group and others. So it's something that the character struggles with, something the character misses sometimes, and I was really interested in having a character with those type of flaws.
And there, the racial inequity that's demonstrated. I mean, it's the 1940s and in the South. Even present day, would still many of the things would still apply. There's a line that they don't die the same as you and me in terms of Black people and white people. Their bodies die, but they pass that money, that power onto their children. So in a way, they live on. At what point did you put that line in? And did that line change at all with the past year that we've had? Because it seems like it carries so much more weight and power, and it's something that I've tried to. We live in a very white county in Chautauqua County, not a lot of diversity. So it's something that like I've tried to connect with and grapple with that fact and tried to express it to people who may not get it as clearly. And that line just does a very good job of demonstrating the idea.
Thank you. Yeah, it was the idea that history that lingers, where too many histories of others, of particularly people of color, communities of color, African American communities, have just been disappeared. Right. It takes others to actually tell those stories sometimes, when we weren't allowed to tell them ourselves. So it's that idea that things can carry forward differently. This being quite a bit of a history, and particularly the front portion of it being that history, that's how this character is capturing things. It's through that type of history, but it's not one for this character, whereas it lingers. It doesn't carry over in the same way. So when the other character mentions that our histories are more fluid, our histories are unfortunately feel as if they could easily evaporate from us, that the others, for a lot of white people, it just seemed to carry on, and the privilege from one generation to the next got to carry on as well. Where for ours, yeah, that history, that story, that grounding, just again evaporates and disappears too often.
And there were parts of the book, and I don't know if this was just my interpretation of it or and how much of it was intentional on your end, but just as a white person reading this book, and I feel like so many people, everyone should, but I felt like I was more afraid for the character and some of the situations that they were in than he was, just because of his lived experience. I'm like, that car is probably going to start to follow you. And he just, there were certain times when Minister was more concerned, like when he thought the train was just gone, and when he suddenly realized that he was left behind at his one friend's or the one fellow passenger's house. There was just a lot where he was just like, yes, this is reality. And I'm like, you need to find somewhere to hide, please.
And I wanted that tension to stay. Yeah. That tension to really say that things can really go wrong quite quickly. But yet have these characters know that, to sense that oftentimes it does not stop their next actions. If they will proceed, because that idea of things going wrong was just a permanent part of their lives. So their ambitions then shouldn't be or wasn't hampered by that. So, but I did want to make sure that the reader felt that the reader did feel like, oh, at any point this can really be horrific. Yes. This can really turn out not well. But again, the idea of the stifling nature of it, again, the car, I want to keep everything enclosed. I want to make sure that the reader stayed in that moment, stayed in that feeling, as many of the people who did take that journey as well, even prior, had that feeling in their day-to-day lives. Like at any point, walking down the street, or going to see friends, or going to work could turn into a horrific experience.
There's so much internal tension with the external moments. But the train seems kind of like when he's on the train, it's almost like a horror movie. When it's daylight, you feel like you're okay.
right. Maybe that's gonna happen.
Like every time he just makes the decision to get off the train, I'm like, no, stay on the train. Don't go up the stairs. The calls are coming from inside the house.
Right. Like stay inside. Like, don't run into the attic. Right. But I wanted that to have that feeling that everything was safer on the train, because of the idea, of course, being hope. but was it really? Like the train was taking them to the unknown. The train was
Mhm.
something that could have just been one of their largest mistakes. The train being so enclosed, again, and the train being so stifling, for a lot of them for that period of time, that was their lives, was just that train, and making sure that all of their belongings went up there with them. The anticipation of getting up there, also the fear that when they get up there, it may not be as they have expected. So the idea I wanted to counter was being on the train was relatively safe. I wanted to kind of circumvent that a little bit to say, well, is it as safe because it is taking them to the unknown or a precipice in some way, possibly.
And going through the writing process, for the supplemental characters, were there more? Were there less over the years that you were writing it?
No, they were the four. I knew they were going to be the four. What I wanted from them is, again, to represent many different aspects and many different desires for coming up there. Maybe not all of them spoken, but at the same time, maybe not all of them known internally to them. Each one making a journey, of course, it being for one of hope, but they may not admit that to themselves, and they may phrase it to themselves a little bit differently. But I did want to make sure that it was going to be just these characters, making sure that they also have full existence in the sense that they have their triumphs, they have their wins, they have their foibles, they have their desires, they have their fears, even though they may not be as open with them when they're all together. One thing that Minister does help with, as being the character that who he is, was oftentimes the other characters will speak to him or relate things to him that they wouldn't to the other group. And they oftentimes are revealed about how they want to interact with him, either trusting, wary, suspicious, or just want more, even just playful, how they choose to interact with them or not interact with him. And if it's a moment in which they wanted to really exude who they are, in a sense, they may not interact with him in that sense, but each one wanted to at least put on their best selves, their idea of what their best selves can be.
And I felt like there was kind of this rhythm of the people that he goes off the train with, because it's lunch with Lana, and then going to the house with Carvel, or Dominion. Yes. And then I was just kind of waiting for the moment where he gets off the train with Carvel. And was there a reason that he didn't have that extra one-on-one? He has the one-on-one that I don't want to spoil for anyone who hasn't read it, but
and he goes out with him just like as a group. But I want to keep that conversation on the train because of the other people who are also on the train. It's almost like an enclosed audience, and what that enclosed audience was witnessing or not witnessing or seeing, and the comfort that Carvel would have had on that train. When Carvel enters the train, there's an open seat across from the main character, Minister, but in nervousness, he sits down right next to Minister for comfort. He sits down right next to him. He could have very easily taken the open seat, but he chooses not to. So there's a camaraderie also from what happened before that I wanted that scene to be with the two of them together in that enclosed area where it wouldn't have been possible for the other to leave, and then have that openness for Carvel and that expression to really happen as that train is just moving towards the destination.
And I just want to make another note. If anyone new has joined us during the time, we're taking questions or comments through Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can just use the comment feature there. The book has been out for about a month now, a little over a month. Have you felt that it's taken on a life of its own? Have you received feedback from it that surprised you in any way?
Great. I mean, it's all been great. It's all been absolutely fantastic. The feedback has been fantastic. The experience all the way through. It's just been wonderful. And it has. I mean, it's the best feeling. Like you go through a bookstore and you see like your book next to Fitzgerald, right? Only because it's alphabetical. right? I'll take it. So just to be on the shelves that way, it's just, I mean, it's been an amazing experience. And it has taken on a life of its own. And I do get people coming up or just saying, hey, I read your book and I love the passage where this happens, or I'm halfway through it. I can't, but I don't want to rush through it, so things like that. Whenever I've gotten that type of feedback, just been invaluable. Yeah, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, my reading experience with it, because it's definitely it's a novella, so you could absolutely read it in one sitting. Having 3 young kids, it's very impossible to read 120 some pages in one sitting. But I'm so glad that I didn't, just because of the pacing of the work. It does span a few days. It's really a lifetime. But I'm glad that I was able to read it at the pace that I did, and read the chunks that I did to be able to digest each section. So if you haven't read it yet, take your time with it.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. Again, shorter, but it's designed for both, right? Please do. Yeah. Take your time with it. Or I know people were like, I wanted to take my time with it, and I just sat down at night. And I took a day off. I took a day off of work, and I just had to get through it. I'm like, okay, as your reading availability is there, but
you're affecting people's paid time off. That's pretty good compliment.
I thought so. Right. To say, woohoo, I get to get some of their vacation time. So yeah, I really did appreciate that. But just again, the experience of having people just read it, enjoy it, read it through. I know people who have gotten to the end of it and then they said, well, I didn't really. I think I missed some parts. I'm going to start and I'm going to read it all over again. And then they'll text me or post something like, now I got what this section's about. Like, now I see the relation. So all of that has been just amazing fun. Fun.
I appreciate so much of the reality of it. And when you reach the end, that it's not necessarily a happy ending, and there's not just a ton of closure, but it's very, I feel like it's real life. Like it's a true story. The amount of baggage that the main character is carrying, and literally, as well as internally. Was there a reason that you chose the quilts for that representation?
Yes, and that's also something that came up with a lot of family as well. Is that quilts being, of course, something that you could transport with you, give you warmth. The idea that the North was going to be so much colder, which it is. As a Buffalonian, which it can be, but that idea of a quilt, warmth, something from home, but yet the idea that is also practical, right? It's the sense that I'm not taking this up because I need that thing from home that's going to actually protect me or remind me of where I'm from. It's just a practical thing for me to take, but really it having that sublayer to it, having that warmth, that feeling of home, that feeling of family, that kind of come through the idea of a quilt, of taking a quilt with you. So I wanted to have that be something where it is something that, again, the character would just think as being practical, right? But really it is a part of an emotion that is tied to it as well. And for so many who carried up, again, warm clothing, so many of them carried up, again, suits that perhaps worn over coveralls or overalls because of the best way to transport them, carrying all those things up with them for what may seem like practical, but also personal reasons too.
And we talked quite a bit about survival towards the end with how it all turns out. It seems like it's survival, but also acceptance of surviving can be enough. And then I like the line, our next author talk is going to be with an astrophysicist. So I really appreciated where you went with destruction is a myth because things can never truly end. And then you went into the concept of it's just matter moving around.
Yeah. And I really wanted that really to be an idea, of course, of how do we see closure, right?
Mhm.
How do we conceptualize what is the end of a journey? It may be an end of a journey as far as a train ride, or it could be a continuing journey of hope. It could be a continuing journey of aspiration or dreams, but just the idea of what constitutes that end. Things rearrange, right? What one may have considered hope at one point may be different going forward. A success may be different going forward. A journey, or where a journey ends, the idea of where that journey has ended may be different as we reflect upon it. So I wanted to make sure that idea of particles rearranging, things not quite ending as we may see them, and going on for a while.
Yeah. And I haven't read this whole question, but it's congrats on this again, Stacy. Ben from New York here.
Ben, thank you, Ben.
Do you have other characters like Minister whose stories you can't wait to tell? Are there other characters you are now writing for? And then he added also a note. He ordered copies for his dad and father-in-law, both with some migratory life experiences. So he's curious to hear their feedback once they read it.
Awesome. Yeah, please share as well. Thanks again, Ben. Yeah, it's awesome. So there are in a couple of characters that I'm writing now, and those are really the other characters that stay with me. Now, whether or not that I will continue on with the work, if the story is still there, if the narrative is there, if I can find the right venue or the avenue for those stories, it may be, again, that's just another notebook that's just by for a while. But there are those characters that sometimes will stay with me, and it's just oftentimes finding the right setting, the right avenue, the right story for them, and seeing whether or not one story or one medium serves them better than another. When I do find that, oftentimes like, oh, now I can go back to those pages that I may have abandoned earlier. Now I can go back to that character's story, and it could happen at any point. There are, again, those characters that still are moving around in my brain. It's just a matter of finding the right avenue for them.
And I know we have at least one of our local writers that's watching, and I know there's going to be a couple more that if they're not watching, they will later. And then myself aspiring to write something. It took me a decade to finish a screenplay, and I was glad to get that done. Good. And the fact that it took you 12 to 13 years to write this out, I find inspiring.
Good.
And giving me hope that someday I will actually complete.
And it is just a matter of just going through it, right? If anything, I want to make sure that I give people that encouragement. Please do. Please take that artistic strength, that artistic passion, and follow it through. And it doesn't need to be something where you're sitting down for 5 hours at a time or anything like that. Take the moments that you can. Right? Mm-hmm. Cherish those moments, because I've just been inspired all the times that I had the chance to write and work on this. And never feel like I've been working on this for a while. If it still holds that heat and that passion for you, please do. Please continue with it, because I think that's going to come out on the page.
How did COVID impact your creative process? I know some people, they were able to churn out a lot. Other people, they were just completely debilitated by the experience. Where did you fall on that spectrum?
The funny thing is I kind of feel somewhere in the middle of that, because of course when early part of last year when the lockdowns happened, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna write War and Peace. Oh yeah, this is gonna be all. And of course everyone with the whole Shakespeare have written through a pandemic, right? Yeah. Everyone goes with that. Like, well, if you can do that, then you can do something. So like, oh yes, absolutely right, 100%. I had this whole list of things that I was gonna do. I did maybe half, but but again, with that, was kind of amazing. Like the other day, I found a screenplay that I wrote early part of last year that I forgot about. I was like, oh, wait a minute, I forgot I wrote that. So I have to reassess how successful my writing has been through all of it. It may have been that I actually wrote more than I expected to, but it was something that did help me focus to a degree, but also getting out into the world being able to, again, hear dialogue, being able to have those various experiences. I look through those different lenses that may not be mine. That was missed.
I had the experience where I'd started a project in like 2015, 2016, and then there was just elements in it of a pandemic that happened. Like it's kind of a dystopian future, and it's like 30 years after the pandemic, and there was a vaccine. And it's just, I'm like, oh, I probably should have finished writing this a few years ago. Now I just feel like I'm writing out what's happening.
That's you're like, oh, I missed my timing, right?
Yeah.
Like, man, it's right there. Yeah, it is. Sometimes those things you're like, oh man, I should have had that. And I also have what I call a cheat story. And this is if you have your main project, and your main project is one in which it takes a lot of time and effort, and there's just something silly that you write on the side. Like this is going to be fun. It clears the mind. It clears the palate a little bit. And I wrote more on that than I expected to. Right. It's a pirate story. It's pirates doing pirate things, right? There's no subtext or anything like that to it. That's all it really is. But I did have a chance to write a little bit more on that, and which helped when I was conceptualizing the newer works.
Great. Well, I wanted to put a link in here. We have the book in stock in the store, but if you're not local to us, there's a link on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter where you can go right to our website to pick up a copy or two. But The Salt Fields by Stacy Flood, thank you so much for joining us. And I also wanted to make note that we have two events coming up next month. On May 12th, we're going to be talking to Katie Mack, who is an astrophysicist. She wrote The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking, and it's about the 5 most likely ways that the universe will come to an end. It's not 4 billions of years, we think, so don't panic. May 26th, we're going to speak to another Lanternfish Press author. It's The Anatomist's Tale, Being the Confessions of an Unwilling Pirate. So maybe you guys can do a collaboration.
I'm in.
It's a Being the Confessions of an Unwilling Pirate Marooned for a Time Upon the Shores of New Madagascar by Tono Bildstead. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, so I need to learn that before I speak with him in person a month from now.
Cool.
But Stacey, was there any final thoughts or things that you wanted to share with us?
Just thank everyone for your time. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Ben, and everyone for their questions, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much as well, Bob.
Great. Thank you, and have a nice night, everybody.
Take care, everyone.